So I was walked out along this country lane, and I can remember stopping on this fence gate, looking over the moors, looking over this village where we were based, and it was a beautiful spot, and I was having some kind of quiet time, and God spoke to me and told me I was going to be a leader of the church.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 35, part 1. My guest today is a dentist who lives in northwestern England. His Christianity was personal, and he would explore a variety of churches, everything from the Methodist Church to charismatic churches. He remembers going to see Billy Graham preach in person. He also describes the moment when he said God called him to be a leader in the church. He talks about the Toronto Blessing, which is a charismatic movement from the mid-90s that I actually was familiar with as well. The first big life events that challenged his faith were his wife being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at a young age, and then when their first son was born, as a young couple, they found out that he had cystic fibrosis. These challenges did not act to threaten his faith, but in fact strengthened his faith. It wasn't until later when he began to make observations and ask questions about Christianity that things began to change. It was great to meet him, and it was a lot of fun talking to him. I enjoyed meeting someone who was a fellow deconvert and who lived in another country and kind of contrasting his experience with that of my experience and the American experience of deconversion. There's a lot of similarities, but there's definitely some differences too. Without further ado, here's my interview with Ian Redfearn. All right, well, Ian, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
That's a pleasure.
So I always like to start out kind of asking people before we get into your story, do you consider yourself, do you go by atheist, agnostic, or is there another term that you prefer to use?
If I'm having this simple question with somebody on the street, so to speak, then I'll just call myself an atheist because people pretty much understand what that means. If I'm having a little more of a longer conversation, then I would tend to use the phrase I'm an agnostic atheist. Because by my understanding, and I'm no expert by any means, but from my reading around the subject, my understanding is that an agnostic is someone who has an absence of knowledge of God. In other words, on an intellectual level, I see no reason to believe in the existence of a deity or a supernatural being of some sort. Mm-hmm. Whereas atheism is a lack of belief, a lack of faith. And so I have both of those. I'm in that place at the moment. I have neither faith nor an intellectual belief in the existence of a supernatural being. So, as I'm sure you probably find most people have that spectrum where they've got a Christian one end or believer one end, agnostic in the middle, atheist at the other end. So short answer is atheist, but longer answer, which you've just been victim of, is the agnostic atheist.
No, that's actually kind of interesting because I would tend to, and I've heard other people say, like they would tend to say, maybe, I'm just not religious, or, I'm agnostic, because they don't want to say the word atheist, because for a lot of people that's so edgy. So that's interesting that you would, but I do like the word atheist for the simplicity of it. Like, hey, I don't believe, like that's where I'm at. So your answer is interesting.
Now, it may well be actually interestingly. Obviously, I'm speaking to you from the UK, so and it's a gross generalisation. But I just wonder, maybe sort of culturally, that atheist is a much more accepted label to use over here than perhaps it is in the States.
Do you? I tend to think that too, and that's what I've heard. So, do you think that's true then? That like in Europe or in England, it's.
Oh yeah. No question at all. And it doesn't raise an eyebrow if you say that over here. Whereas
that's funny.
I suspect culturally over in on your side of the pond, it can be a little bit more of a loaded phrase to use.
Yeah, if you say that in a group of like mixed company with like some Christians and some whatever, you'll get some people's eyes kind of get big,
Yeah.
Because they assume that you're saying that you hate Christians the second you say I'm an atheist. It's like that's
Right,
how
there
they
you
take
go.
it.
Yeah, yeah, no, no. So it's not loaded in the same way over here, and obviously, interestingly, at the moment, the whole political scene and observing what's going over for you guys at the moment, it's an interesting time politically.
Yeah.
Whereas over in the UK, for a politician to state that they are an atheist is no biggie. It will maybe cause some problems. It's not something they will parade around, but it wouldn't, that's it, end of. There's no way they could ever stand for elected office. There was one of the recent political leaders, he was an atheist, and that was no biggie. And in the same way, if a politician over here was overtly vocal about their faith or their Christianity, that also would kind of be a little bit, not sure we're comfortable with that. So, we'll just kind of keep it mellow and pretty English about the whole thing.
English about the whole thing. That's
so
awesome.
The contrast, obviously, with what's going on for you guys at the moment couldn't be more alert, really.
Oh wow, yeah, it's really interesting the differences. I really like to kind of hear the contrast between the two countries.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, what part of England are you calling from?
Okay, so I'm calling you from the nearest town is a place called Burnley. Our nearest city is Manchester, so that's about 40 minutes away from me. So we're in the north of England, in the northwest of England.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know England super, super well, but I was curious.
Course.
I always like to kind of, I don't know, it's always interesting to me, especially when it's Skype-like, around the world. It's cool to be able to talk to people all over the place, so...
Yeah, so where are you?
I don't know if you know Washington State too well, but I'm near Seattle.
Okay, Seattle, that's right. Yes, of course, yeah. Okay, yeah, so, I've been to Vancouver, so I guess that's the nearest I've been to.
Okay, Vancouver, Canada.
Guys over. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same weather. That's pretty much the same place.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, well, let's go ahead and get into a little bit of your background and your story. So, just growing up, how did Christianity influence your childhood?
It was always there, really. I was brought up in to go to church. My mum and dad are Methodists. That was the church that they went to. And so right from being a baby, I was christened in the Methodist church, and we would go to church every Sunday. So, and that was a pretty normal thing to do for not most kids, but a lot of kids, So we're talking, I was born in 1966. That's terrifying. So we're looking at, in the sort of 1970s, every Sunday, it would be Sunday morning, 10:30 service at the local Methodist chapel. It would be a typical hymn sandwich type service. With a sort of 15-minute sermon, and my abiding memory of going to church was it was boring. But at the same time, there was other stuff going on as well. So there'd be Sunday school, so the kids would go out, partway through the service, and I used to enjoy that. And, I was meeting with a group of people my age, and there was an extended family around you there that you grew up and were part of. So that was part of my culture. Going to church was just the normal thing that you would do.
Yeah.
I guess getting into teenage years, you became more conscious of these things, and there's no doubt that going to church was pretty much something I wouldn't particularly talk about. It was a bit embarrassing among a lot of my friends who weren't churchgoers at the time, but I still went because that's what your mum and dad. With my three, I'm the eldest of 4 children, and we all would go to the local church.
So you said amongst some of your friends, it was, did you say embarrassing?
Yeah, embarrassing. Yeah. A lot. I would say probably the majority of kids were not going to church at my age, but a significant amount. I wasn't unusual. It's not like you're part of a cult of any sort. Yeah. It was the norm for a lot of us, but it wasn't again, culturally. I'm making major generalizations now, of course, but in the 70s and 80s in England, it was a done thing, but it wasn't the thing, and it certainly wasn't unusual not to go to church. And faith was not something people really talked about to any extent at all, quite honestly.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was a part of your life. It wasn't all-consuming. It wasn't like
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did you say the sermon was 15 minutes long usually?
Yeah,
1-5?
Yeah, 15 to 20 minutes long
Okay.
would be a normal sermon in a. The whole service would probably take from 10:30 till 12. There'd be the hymns, there'd be a few Bible readings, and if you stayed in the service, there'd be a sermon 15, 20 minutes long,
I think
final
that's
hymn, and everybody goes.
I think that's pretty typical for like the Methodist Church, or
Yeah,
even
yeah,
here in
yeah.
America, like Episcopal or Anglican or whatever. Like those denominations often have the shorter sermons. I grew up with like 30-minute sermons because I grew up in kind of the kind of evangelical, preacher
Right.
goes on for a
Okay.
long
Yeah, yeah,
time
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
that's
so talking about evangelicalism, I guess that's where I was kind of confronted more with making decisions about faith, because I remember that we had some family friends and they were within the Methodist Church, but there was within the Methodist Church a small, I guess, fringe but evangelical stroke charismatic wing within that. And as it happened, some close family friends were involved in that. I think it was called the Methodist Revival Fellowship at the
wow.
time. And it's funny, I was just thinking about this recently when I'm thinking about coming up to this interview, and I remember, I guess, my first exposure to the whole idea of evangelical Christianity was going along to a youth meeting. It must have been one of the son of this family who were into this kind of thing, and I was blown away to be with it was only a small group, but a small group of young people who were cool, who were enthusiastic about their faith and talking about Jesus in a way that I'd never heard of before this term, in terms of a personal relationship and worship being on the guitar. This was all brand new, and it blew me away. I remember being very impressed by the whole thing, thinking, "Well, this is something new. This is something different," and I was very attracted to that. So I was probably I'm guessing 13, maybe 14, 15 at this time.
Okay.
And
Yeah, so
so
very
that.
impressionable age.
Oh yeah, no question at
Yeah.
all. And and certainly my mum in particular had more sympathies towards that expression of Christianity, and so that really started years and years of playing with the idea of what this actually meant. And do you know what? I remember now, I did. For a time, if people asked me, I would call myself a Christian, and I was reading the Bible every day. And there was a phase, probably when I was maybe 14, 15, 16, where internally I would describe myself as being born again, having a relationship with Jesus.
Oh wow. Okay.
But at the same time, not wanting to I certainly would not tell any of my friends at school. There was no way that was going anywhere. And so I kind of kept a quiet lid on that, only let it show itself if I did ever meet up with this group of more evangelical type young Christians.
Interesting.
So it was still a source of, I guess, embarrassment. But as you can imagine, there I am trying to hold these two parts of my life together, and that's already a source of tension, which I kind of suppressed. And I guess I kind of grew out of that for a number of years when I was 15, 16. And it was only age 17, 18 where I was kind of confronted with it all again. That was partly because of a family moving to a different area. And as I remember, it was around this time, so it was 1985, we had your very own Billy Graham come over.
Oh my goodness.
Absolutely, the man himself came over and did a number of missions. It was called Mission England. So it's Mission England in 1985, and he spoke in a number of football stadiums up and down the country. And I can remember going to one of those with a busload of from the Methodist church I was going to at the time, and hearing Billy Graham and seeing my friend go down to say the prayer, and somehow convincing myself that I didn't need to because I was in some way already a Christian. I just have this overriding. I'm going back a while now. This overriding memory of conflict within myself, trying to reconcile. What I was hearing, what people were claiming, what I was believing myself, and the crunch moment for me came when. So this is now I'm now 18 years old. I've done what I call the A levels. So in the UK, the education system is up to age 16, you do GCEs, or what we used to call O levels at the time, and then you do 2 years additional study called A levels, and then that's when you make the decision during that time whether you're going to go to university or not. And I'd applied to go to university, and I'd been accepted to do dentistry. So my life was pretty much, I got the results. I knew I was going to Newcastle, which is in the northeast of England, to Newcastle Dental School, to the university there. Everything was all lined up, and if you asked me my testimony at the time, my testimony would be, my life was all laid out before me. I had all these opportunities, and I was going to be had the excitement of going to university, and the opportunity of starting a career that's probably going to look after me very well. But the way I would describe the way I'd tell my testimony at the time would be, but I knew there was something missing. I needed something more, that my life was meaningless unless there wasn't God in my life. Wow. That's what the story was. Whereas actually, thinking about it, the honest truth was I was terrified. I was socially insecure, and the thought of going to university scared the hell out of me. And it was actually, I needed Christianity. I needed something more to get me through that. It wasn't, everything's going to be okay. It was actually, I'm terrified. I didn't want to admit that I needed God, I guess. That was out of, from a position of weakness. To admit that you needed God, that didn't sound cool enough in my testimony. So I'd kind of make up some other narrative instead. So I would say I needed God. So I can remember I was sat down reading a book, and it was called Miracle Valley. And it was the whole story about a small fellowship in a farm in a part of England, Yorkshire, I think it was, called Hollybush Farm. And there's just a little paperback, and there's all these kind of stories of God doing amazing things and healings, and God supplying the money to set up this fellowship. And I remember reading that book and thinking, I want some of that. I need some of that. So in my bedroom in the summer 1985, I said the prayer, and I can remember going downstairs and telling my mum that I'd asked Jesus into my life. And that's the point I became a Christian. I was born again.
And you were 18, you said?
18 years old, yeah. About to go to university in Newcastle.
Okay, yeah. And then what was your mom's response when you told her?
Delighted, yeah. She was all for it. She thought this was a great thing, and she, as I remember, she was thrilled. Yeah, no question at all.
Yeah.
And it felt good. I mean, I can remember the buzz. I can remember feeling. I felt different. I mean, I was a changed person from that experience.
So then, how did your life change then at that point? Because that's clearly it was a big moment in your life.
It was. There's no doubt that was a real experience, and obviously, and it's interesting. You look back on that now and think, well, I cannot deny that was a real experience. What was that about now? It's an interesting question, isn't it? How did my life change? So I was in a good place. I remember going to university and all the challenges, settling to a new place, making new friends. I very quickly settled into, there was a Methodist Society, or METHSOC for short, as it was called in the university, joining the METHSOC. Lots of Christian societies that were active in the university. So I very quickly made friendships, with some other Christians within the hall of residence. I was staying in my first couple of years at university. My first girlfriend met through one of the Christian societies. There was a Christian society called the Navigators, and I think that's has its origins in the United States, actually, the Navigators, which is, again, an evangelical type of organization, but very much focused on learning the Bible. Not particularly charismatic, I don't remember, but she was a member of the Navigators. So my first proper relationship with a girl, and that was, as my understanding, that was down to God. A whole set of new friends down to God, and I felt, that this, I was in a good place. But at the same time, if I'm honest, pretty angst-ridden, all the usual insecurities that you kind of mask and hide over, wanting to fit in and feeling a bit out of place, but at the same time being fairly vocal about my Christianity as well. I had no problem telling people, and I can remember the very first night in the Students' Union, the bar, in the Methodist, in the halls of residence, there was got talking to this guy who was also doing dentistry, so he just started as well, a guy called Richard, and he was saying, I should warn you, next door to me, beware, there's the God Squad. So he was talking about the Christian Union. There was the Christian Union. There's obviously somebody involved in the Christian Union was in the room next to him, and I says, well, do you know what? I'm God squad as well. So I had no problem being quite open and vocal about my Christianity.
That's funny.
So, and it was good going away, and it meant so. My average Sunday on the morning, the nearest, there were a number of churches that people used to go to, of course, in the city of Newcastle. And the one I settled into was the local Assemblies of God church. It was called Beth Shan, as I recall, which was 10 minutes walk away from the Hall of Residence, and that was great. It was a big by UK standards, maybe 400, 500 people in the congregation, very charismatic, and I loved that on a morning. Then the afternoon, there would be the METHSOC meeting. So that would be in a different part of the city. Go over, the group of METHSOC students would get together in a hall that was attached to a particular church, and we kind of have our own meeting and a speaker, have some food together, and then usually stay on for the Methodist sermon in the evening, Methodist service in the evening. So I had quite a range of Christian exposure. Probably a good thing. So in the morning it was full on happy clappy charismatic in the morning, and then in the evening back to the traditional Methodist hymn sandwich in the evening. And it was good because I was with lots of people who I like being with, and I have to say a pretty good place.
Yeah, so you were really socially active for someone who was kind of afraid of, maybe not afraid, but a little timid as far as like the social stuff in college. It sounds like you were very social and very involved.
Yeah, I mean, I bought into it, and I was kind of, I would share my faith as the opportunity arose. Thinking about it, I can think of one person who, I could notch up as someone I brought to faith in Christ, and that's always a good thing, isn't it, when you're an evangelical, when you can claim that you've led someone to Christ. So that further validated that I was doing the right thing in the right place, and that God's hand was on my life.
Yeah, and you've kind of touched on this subject a little bit, but what did God mean to you personally, like on a personal level?
Yeah, I mean, he was, God was a very real, intimate relationship with him. I would have a active prayer life. I was reading the Bible every day. It was very much so. I mean, I can remember in my summer after my first year at university in that summer. So I had a 3-month sort of break. So this is the summer of 1986. I went on one mission or maybe a couple of missions. So basically there was an opportunity. Again, it was in the Methodist church but there was a particular evangelist. I forget his name now, but he ran a mission. It was called Village 86, and the idea was, so groups of young people, mainly young people, not exclusively, would basically be based in churches in a rural village. At that time it was down in the southwest of England, an area called Dorset. And you'd be based in this village church, and you do the door to door. You would do various outreach events. We did a ceilidh, a sort of country dance type thing. We did door to door. We led the services. We were there to share our faith, and I was totally into that. No problem. I'm totally bought into that. And I can remember because you're kind of you're in that environment, and I'm hardwired to believe, to have faith. I think some of us, I don't know, but I think just some of us find religion a lot easier than others. And I'm definitely one of those people who, the way my brain works at some level, I can buy into the supernatural on that level. And I can remember after my quiet time, this was on the mission down in Dorset, and beautiful area. So I was walked out along this country lane, and I can remember stopping on this fence gate, looking over the moors, looking over this village where we were based, and it was a beautiful spot, and I was having some kind of quiet time, and God spoke to me and told me I was going to be a leader of a church.
Oh wow!
Now, this.
Well, I mean, we've all. Yeah, no, I said wow, just because that sounds like a big moment,
A big moment. So this is the power story. This is the power of. Maybe it's because I've recounted the story so many times it becomes a real thing. But I'm pretty sure that I remember walking away from that with an absolute conviction that I would say I heard God. Now, did I hear God's voice? It felt like it, I guess, but God told me that. And boy, that I walked away blown away. What do I do with this information? but this was an absolute revelation, and that stayed with me, as you can imagine, for most of my adult life. That God had told me that, and that had an influence on all kinds of life decisions since then.
Well, yeah, now I'm curious. Now I want to know. Like, you piqued my interest. So what life decisions did that lead to? And at the same time, you're still pursuing dentistry?
Still pursuing dentistry. So I'm still a dental student, and I did all that, and so what happened since then? So let's try to think about it chronologically. So great time at university. You kind of, moved out the halls of residence, still active within the METHSOC, occasionally do a little bit of preaching, with the opportunities that arose to do that. So kind of growing in that, leading the smaller fellowship groups we used to have within METHSOC and elsewhere. So growing in a sort of a teaching type ministry, I guess. But also having a wider experience with churches, actually, because at one point we moved away. The Hall of Residence moved to a different area of Newcastle, an area called Benwell, and so we were just in this 2 up, 2 down terraced house. It was so cheap. It was brilliant as a student at the time. It was so easy. But also, what was good about it was literally next door, at the bottom of this row of terrace houses, there was a Brethren church, a Brethren hut. So basically a small wooden church called it, and it was part of the Brethren Church over there. And as it happened, I knew someone who went there who was a dental student, maybe a couple of years ahead of me. So it wasn't a complete strange place to me. And occasionally, that actually became one of my churches that I used to go to. I'm just trying to remember how it mixed in with I was still attending Beth Shan, the Assemblies of God, but I was also, I think, to be honest, it ended what time I woke up. It was great to be able to wake up sort of 10 to 11 and still on a Sunday morning and still make church. So I would just trip down next door either in the morning or particularly in the evening. It was so convenient, and be part of a Brethren church, which was, in one way, got the complete opposite spectrum from being as part of the Assemblies of God in every way, theologically and in terms of style of worship. And it was Brethren in that only the men would speak during the service.
Oh, wow.
All the women.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the Brethren Church, so this is interesting.
Well, yeah, the Brethren, I mean, within the Brethren churches, there is a spectrum. There's some pretty extreme quite culty stuff with the so-called Plymouth Brethren at one end. But the Brethren Church was a very traditional, reformed, evangelical type place. But it was all these and thous. It was the King James Bible. There was no music, so any of the hymns were sang without any musical accompaniment at all.
Wow.
But do you know what? It was still a group of believers that I felt a part of, and they made me welcome. And I can remember my girlfriend, Sarah, who's now my wife. We did a few kind of social things with them as well. So that was part of my exposure as well. I also remember actually. So yeah, being at university was good because it exposed. I guess it meant I wasn't just exposed to one flavour of Christianity. And I can remember another mission outreach that I did with it was a Christian Union of Wales. That was right. It was Wales Christian Union. So in Wales, South Wales, we did 2 weeks in a small sort of town, an ex sort of mining town. So quite challenging place, socially challenging place. Again, based in this small, I think it was a Baptist church then. But what I didn't know until I went was that the Welsh Christian Union are a very reformed, but theologically on the sort of much more the conservative end of the spectrum of evangelicalism. I had no idea about that. I didn't even know this existed. So it was my first exposure to the whole idea of Calvinism, which I don't know if it's, yeah. So the whole, and this, I have to say, it was weird, and I found it very, very difficult at times being exposed to this whole way of thinking that that there is God's chosen and there's nothing you can do about it. There's absolutely
that was weird to me because I wasn't raised that way. So when I learned about friends that believed that, it just felt so counter to everything I knew. Yeah.
I mean, and there's no doubt that it grated on one level. It was really difficult. I think TULIP is the acronym to sum up the, isn't it? Total depravity. Oh God, unlimited. I forget now. limited atonement, persecution of the saints, something like that, isn't it?
I can't remember it. Yeah.
Someone will correct me on that.
Yeah.
But being exposed to that, and also that the King James Bible was the only true Bible, that anything else was in some way tainted or compromised. This blew me away, and I found it difficult. But yeah, at the same time, these were great people to be with. So again, on a human level, this is okay. I could go out, I could do the door-to-door with these people. We had fun together. And so I felt I was, on one level, I was becoming quite enlightened here, that, there wasn't just one flavour of Christianity. I could just as easily worship in a charismatic church as I could within a Brethren church. I was quite grateful for the exposure to different types of Christianity that were out there. And yet somehow, I was able to say, do you know what? If you and I believe in Jesus, then that's okay. That's good enough. I can work with that.
Yeah. It's the community, it's cool. I mean, on that level, I think it's great. It's like church provides this place to gather, this thing to gather around. And you're finding these different versions of it, but it's at the bottom, at the base level. It's community.
Yep, absolutely, and I was very grateful for that, and that saw me through. As a socially insecure, crippled with doubts and about myself, to be part of a affirming group of people, that was great. And also, I can remember, the revelation. Actually, when Christianity, it is a fantastic story. Christianity, it is a great. It's a great story, and to know and to believe that you are loved by God, individually loved by God, created by God. He has a purpose for your life, and what anybody else thinks about you doesn't matter, because you know what? God's got your back. It's powerful stuff. Yeah. It is powerful stuff, isn't it? And that saw me through. There is no doubt at all. That saw me through most of my years as a young adult.
And it sounds like you met your wife during this time in your life as well.
Totally, yes. So Sarah, she was also a member of METHSOC. She was part of, we had what used to be called Newcastle Polytechnic. So she was at a different kind of college, I guess, in Newcastle. But we met in METHSOC in 1987. So Sarah and I, we've been together for 30 years, and I can, So yeah, I can remember again one of those prayer times when I was kind of exploring what's my future going to be with Sarah, and I can remember praying and having this absolute sense that God was saying, yeah, it's okay, you can marry her. And so I really felt, brilliant. I felt, God was saying to me, right, you and Sarah, that's the way it's going to be. And so we got engaged. The summer that I graduated, I did another further year's work in Newcastle, in the autumn, just outside Newcastle, in the northeast, for a year while she was doing a teaching qualification after her degree, and we got married in the summer of 1991. And so then, and for various reasons, we settled where we are now in the northwest of England. Again, I would. In my testimony, my Christian story, that was very much God's hand on that, because I can remember it was going to be easier for me to find a job as a dentist than it was for Sarah to find a job. She was teaching what's called at the time home economics, or domestic science. It used to be called cookery, actually.
Yeah, home ec is what we would call it when I was like in junior high. Yeah, home economics.
So it's called food technology at the moment. That's the latest phrase.
Interesting.
Right? Absolutely. So so it was easier for me. It was we basically we're coming to the point where we're going to get married. We needed somewhere to sell, where we're going to sell, where we're going to live. So we decided, for various reasons, in the northwest of England. I set up a bunch of job interviews, and at that time I could get a job anyway, because there just weren't enough dentists. Nothing to do with me being any good, just people were desperate for dentists. So I set up 5 interviews, was offered 5 jobs over a weekend.
Wow. So things are looking good for your.
Man, it's all lined up, and the place that we settled in, the practice we settled in. The reason we went for it was in the British Dental Journal. That's where all the job interviews were. On the advert for this particular place, the people who own the practice, Nick and Judith Taylor, who are still very good friends of ours. Love them to death. They were both members of the CDF, which is the Christian Dental Fellowship. So there is such a thing, Christian Dental Fellowship, and because they sort of had that on their advert, I thought, okay, that sounds pretty good. But more importantly, when I met them, we clicked, and I thought, yeah, this is, I just felt I would say at the time, I felt God's hand on that. That was the place we were meant to be, and so we moved to this practice in a town called Nelson. Here we are in East Lancashire, just north of Manchester. And that's where we've been ever since. And I've been in the same practice ever since. And when I sat down for that interview, thinking back to the conversation about, God's hand, I told them, I says, you need to understand, I do believe that God's called me to be a leader of a church, a pastor of a church. So I was very open with them about that. I wanted them to know that if I did settle in this place, chances are I wasn't going to be there forever. At some stage, God had other plans. So I still very much believe that at that time.
That's what you told your employer, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
But this Christian Dental Fellowship, is this just a group of random dentists that just kind of came together as Christians just to kind of support each other?
Yep, yeah. It's just absolutely. I mean, you would tend to support. There are various, dental missionaries. So, there's a dentist who use their dental skills put out in the missionary field. So there was very much involved in supporting that, and also just involved in supporting dentists trying to do their day-to-day job, but from a Christian perspective.
Yeah. And so you're going along, and I mean, life looks like it's kind of all laid out in front of you, and you know you know who you are pretty firmly. You're a Christian. You're in Christian groups. Your wife's a Christian. You going to be a dentist, and
it's all good. So we settled in Nelson, and at the recommendation of Nick and Judy Taylor, we tried out this church called the Central Gospel Mission. And that became our church. And the first time we went there, the pastor there, Pastor Ted, he welcomed us in, and it was great. It was this. So this is an independent evangelical church, which can mean anything.
Yeah.
But what it meant was the congregation was maybe 100, on a morning or on an evening. But it was an evangelical church. There was certainly a bit of charismatic light about it as well. So certainly on an evening, there was much more contemporary worship. There would be a worship band. We loved it. It became our family straight away because it was quite a range of people in there. So I walked in there as the new young dentist, and there were all sorts there. And we very quickly settled into that church and became very active in that church as a young married couple.
And as a charismatic church, were there spiritual gifts? Were there people speaking in tongues?
Yeah. So that would be it wasn't. There was always. You very quickly became aware, though, that actually under the surface there was a degree of tension there. So there was within that church a number of us who were described themselves as charismatic and wanted to express the charismatic gifts, whereas the others were much more at the reformed evangelical end of the evangelical spectrum, who were resistant to that, or I guess opposed that being expressed within the church. So what tended to happen, the morning church would be a more traditional church, with the more traditional hymns, and the evening would be the more contemporary worship. And certainly there were a number of house groups within the church, and certain house groups were more charismatic than others, and we naturally fell into the house group that was known as being the happy clappy one. We were
happy clappy. I like that.
Yeah. That's where we settled. And for many years, it was great. We were very active in the youth ministry. That kind of became our thing. I was asked to preach on a number of occasions. And very early on in the first, so this is an independent church. It's not part of any denomination at all. It's kind of member of a number of wider national organizations, but not as a denomination. There was no kind of oversight in that sense. There was a leadership within the church that was elected by the members, and then there was a full-time pastor, Pastor Ted. And within a year, 2 years, I was Pastor Ted asked me to stand for leadership. And that just seemed a perfectly natural thing for me to do. Although, young Christian, that kind of fitted in with what I felt God's calling was in my life. That's a natural step. So I stood for leadership and didn't get on. I was not voted on. And that was difficult. It was interesting. It was difficult at the time. But the reality was, there was enough. I was definitely seen as being a charismatic, and there were enough people. There'll be all sorts of reasons why I wasn't. I was probably, quite rightly in the advice of some people, too young, too inexperienced, and I totally get that, of course, in retrospect. But for other people, the reason would be, he's one of the the happy clappy lot, and we know we don't need any more of those on the leadership.
And were you, how old were you, about 20s or 30s or
20s? Yeah,
okay.
So we're now early to mid 20s. So 91. How old? I would have been 25 years old.
Yeah, so you're a young married couple. You're just getting your start in your careers.
Yeah,
and,
all that. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
okay,
And,
yeah. But then this happened, so then it was a kind of a bummer. A little bit of
a bummer.
Yeah.
And it just exposed you to the fact that we're all Christians, but actually this is people fall out. People do not always agree, and there was that kind of underlying tension there, which you lived with though, because that's family. And I guess that was, again, to many ways, that's the strength of the place. Yeah, okay, we may not agree on everything, but there was at the time, I would say that was part of the strength of the place. There was the diversity within the place. That's what made it a healthy place to be. We just wasn't one flavour. There was space for all sorts of Christians within this church. And I think that's true on many levels. That was the case, and still is the case now. The church is still going, and it is a quite a diverse group of people within it.
Yeah, that's a strength, I think. Yeah, in this case especially. Yeah. So then what happens from there? So you guys just keep attending, or is there something that kind of rots?
Attending.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so what? Yeah, I'm trying to sort of think out what were the markers on the sort of where things began to get a little bit rocky.
Yeah.
If you asked anybody who knows us, they would say, surely one of the major challenges would have been the birth of the first son. And the reason being, so Sam, who's now 21, who's in the room next door to me now, Sam was born 1996, and he was about 4 or 5 weeks premature. But we had all kinds of problems with him as a baby in terms of health problems. He was failure to thrive. Repeated infections. It was a very rough few months. It was not, this was the first challenge to our kind of. Well, actually, that's not true. Actually, thinking about it, thinking back, the first challenge, to us as a couple would have been Sarah was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at a young age, and that was kind of tough. That kind of I guess tested our faith, but we trusted in God with that, and I'm glad to say that that which could have been a pretty devastating diagnosis, although she still has it. Here we are, somewhat 20 whatever years later, and she's okay. She's fine. She occasionally has the odd flare up, so that's all controlled. But that was difficult at the time. Actually, interesting. We were dying again. One of the markers of our Christian experience. So this was around the time we went on holiday. There was on a Christian holiday. It was a Christian company who used to do holidays with small groups of people, and we went on a Christian holiday to Canada. It was and it was actually an outdoors kind of canoeing. It was in Algonquin National Park, which is about 2 hours north of Toronto. But interestingly, just at this time, this was all around the time of the Toronto blessing. I don't know.
Oh my God, no! I totally know what that was a part of my experience. Okay. Yeah, Steve, I know exactly what that is. You're one of the 2 people that I've talked to that know what that is. So,
well. We were all over that. So when that whole Toronto blessing was happening, so this is mid-95. Do you think? When was this?
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
95, 96.
It must have been before Sam was born, so it would have been about 94, 95. So we heard of the Toronto blessing. It was a and that was within the evangelical church in the UK, which is not a particularly big part of the UK church. Within the evangelical church, particularly the charismatic church, this became a big thing. We're reading all kinds of articles about this, and in the relatively early days of the internet, we were all over this, and we thought this sounds amazing. This we didn't. If you remember, Steve, at the time we didn't really quite know what to call it. It wasn't really revival, so we used phrases like refreshing, didn't we, to try and describe this bizarre. Yeah. So maybe for people who are listening who have no idea what this was about, this was an experience where some crazy things went on. It was characterized by in services when the Holy Spirit would descend, and there'd be people you burst out in laughter or being slain in the Spirit. So the whole falling backwards, old Benny Hinn type thing, which some listeners will be familiar with, and lying or rather rolling around under control and laughing, strange body. It was bizarre stuff, but it was accompanied with the whole narrative. Well, this was God pouring out His Spirit on the church, preparing the church for something big. This was a big deal, and very quickly, hearing people have been to churches where this was happening, and they were coming back saying, "This is amazing. You've got to have some of this. We need to be on board with this." And so, this was just becoming big news. And then we went on holiday, flying into Toronto, believe it or not, because the first place was the airport vineyard church at Toronto. It was Toronto Airport. That was the focus. That's where everybody was going to get
where
this
it
thing.
started.
And they take it out with them. So although there wasn't going to be any opportunity to go to that church, as it happened, we were travelling from a different city in the UK called Bath, and we decided to go to a church in the evening before we were going to get the bus to then eventually to fly out. We went to this Bath City Church, I think it was called, and the evening church, and bam, it was all happening, and we were up. I don't remember much about the service. I think the guy was talking about, it's like God has sort of built an overpass. It's kind of bypassing all the normal ways into someone's life. Just build this amazing bypass to dump you directly into God's blessing. Something like that. I don't remember much about that. All I just remember is when they sort of started the time of ministry, Sarah and I, it was in an old, used to be a cinema. So it was an old traditional cinema, this church now. So all the banked seating, and I remember going down to the front with Sarah, this guy coming praying for us, and we just fell over backwards, hand in hand, fell over backwards. And I was crying, I seem to remember, but we just had it was a very real experience.
Yeah, it's a heightened emotional experience for sure.
It is, and there's no doubt that as I said to you before, some of us are just hardwired to buy into this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we had this amazing experience, and then suddenly we're taken from that and we're into Canada, in the middle of nowhere. And it was a beautiful holiday. It was a stunning, beautiful time. Just canoeing and camping. It was amazing, but still processing what this experience. And I can remember we were one night while I was praying. Whatever we just experienced, let that happen in my church. And when we went back to the church after that holiday, here's one of those answers to prayer, and for me, as far as I'm concerned, there was an absolute answer to prayer, because, and I think I was fairly sincere about this when I did the maths, but when I was praying that prayer, taking time into account the time difference, as it turned out, and I didn't know it at the time, but my my house fellowship had an extra meeting to invite God to bless them, and indeed all kinds of people having this experience within the youth fellowship, within the house fellowship. So I'm praying for them to be blessed while I'm on the lakeside in Canada during the day. As it turned out, they were meeting at that time in the UK, experience of everything I was asking God to.
Wow. Yeah, so that's going to make a huge impression on you. I mean, that's confirmation that God is listening and moving in your life. Yeah.
Come on, if that's not God, what is it? Exactly. Right. So that was it. So it was very exciting. But then it was immediately hit with a great deal of resistance, because people were quite rightly deeply suspicious about this, because it was weird, and particularly those who were against the charismatic movement, they just saw this as complete madness. There were many others who were actually were quite rightly skeptical, but trying to be open to that God might be doing something, who were voicing concerns. And I'm pretty sure, fairly dismissive anyway, because as far as I'm concerned, come on, it's obvious. Look what's happening. This is God. It may be weird, but this is obviously God. And my experience of praying for it to happen and finding it happening at the time, clearly validated my belief. Absolutely, this was a God thing. Well, so we were very much part of that.
This is just totally a sidebar thing, but it reminds me, when I was going through all of that, I was about 16 years old, and I was like kind of discovering my relationship with God for the first time and really getting excited about it. And I gave a talk in front of my youth group. Well, it's at my uncle's church, and I never forgot it, because it was like the first sermon I ever preached, kind of thing. And it was you can't put God in a box, and that totally is like that came
Yep.
from that whole movement of like, hey,
Yep.
you can't say this isn't God, and
No,
but I'm
no, exactly.
super familiar with the conflict because I had a home church I'd grown up in, and they were very skeptical of all this stuff, and then I had these other
Uh-huh.
churches I was going to that were very
Yeah.
open to it, and so there was this conflict. Yeah, made me
And
think of
I can
that.
rem-
Yeah.
and also you remember actually for those people who genuinely wanted to experience it, but because and I'm pretty sure that exactly the same way that some people are more susceptible to hypnosis than others. Some people can be hypnotized very easily. Other people, it doesn't really work. And stage hypnotists are able to spot those people who are susceptible. In fact, carry out exercise to spot the people who are susceptible. So in the same way, some of us, me being one of them, are way open to this kind of bizarre behaviour compared to others. And I can remember some Christians went through all kinds of trauma because they wanted it, but they didn't experience it. And we were trying to find a narrative to explain why this person clearly seemed to be open to it, but it wasn't happening. So what is that? It's because some kind of hidden sin or the work of the devil, or maybe they are being blessed, they're just getting it in a different way. We all struggle to find a way to explain people's different experience of this craziness.
Yeah. You're trying to like explain and understand what's happening when it's kind of nonsensical in general. So it's really hard to make sense of it. But when
Of course.
when it's God moving in your life, you're just okay. What's this mean? Everything that happens has a meaning to it.
It was supernatural. That's what we thought, wasn't it? And so wow, so that was an exciting time.
So then, how long were you and Sarah involved in this movement? And
All the time, really. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on at the same time. But I can remember maybe a couple of years later, we had John Wimber. It was John Wimber. He was the guy. He was
I remember
the
his
main
name.
guy at the Vineyard Church. Yeah, that's right. And he came over and spoke in a town near his place called Harrogate. And I remember going to a Vineyard conference and hearing him speak. And wow, and I was manifesting like you would not believe at that place. It was bizarre. I mean, I can remember, I went over just myself, to this conference, and then they were having a service on the Sunday evening. I remember calling everybody, back here saying, you gotta come because this is amazing. They came over, and I'm all over the place. I'm jerking and fitting, I can remember walking out of the place and still kind of, doubling over, under the Holy Spirit the anointing of the Holy Spirit. I mean, this is crazy stuff, but that's what it was at the time. So it was just an exciting time. But there were the people who were a bit more skeptical, and so this is I'm coming at this time. I'm going through a time of being pretty hard line in my Christianity. The Bible's absolutely 100% true. I remember reading a book called The Darwin Delusion. So that was a book that was kind of questioning the whole scientific base of Darwinism. And I thought this is brilliant. It just further validates, everything my more narrow interpretation of the Bible. This is the mid to late 1990s. That's an interesting time. Except for 1996, Sam was born. It's coming back to the original story. This was, the big challenge. Sam was born very ill, and he was, I think, age 6 months, give or take. We finally got the diagnosis that he has cystic fibrosis. So that is a genetic disease that it messes you up. It messes the body in all sorts of ways, particularly the lungs. And so that was, as you can imagine, just for a young family, for us as young parents, this was a bombshell. That our child had this thing. And so those were tough times, and have been very much so ever since in many, many ways. But not, and I think I'm fairly honest about this, not a fundamental challenge to our faith. And I can remember, even at the time, when confronted with this, thinking, well, what right have I got not to have a child with a genetic condition? In my understanding at that time, just because I'm a Christian and trust God, why would God favor us not to have a child with a medical condition compared to an unbelieving child? That just somehow did not make sense in my concept of God at that time. So it was kind of, okay, well, this is the deal. I've got no understand. We don't understand why, but we're going to deal with this. And by and large, we did really. We kind of held that together, and the church was, bless them, all very, very supportive. It was interesting. We got support from people we wouldn't expect to receive support from, and maybe were surprised by the lack of support from others outside the church as much as inside the church. But as a general rule, the church itself were fantastic. And I've continued to be very supportive ever since, because they've seen us through. We're the young family in the church, and to see one of the children within the church fellowship. So I was really glad to be part of that church at that time, because they were and continue to be very, very supportive of us.
That's interesting. Even now, I mean, we'll get to that part of your story, but yeah,
sure.
I'm really interested to hear about how that all played out. So
yeah.
Sarah's got RA. Sam has cystic fibrosis, and these difficulties are, they're testing your faith, but they're not. But you're strengthened by your faith almost.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. They're not undermining our faith in any way. In actual fact, if anything, I think we kind of saw that as being, well, okay, this is God's. This is, for some way, God's in control of this. I'm not sure we'd ever say with God's plan for our life. So there you go. Every Christian, you struggle that, don't you? Did God want this to happen, or is God able to handle this happening? And
right.
Was this an active part of God's plan for us, or no? God's as upset as we are, but He will help us in that situation. So there's that whole theology there, trying to understand suffering, on an individual level, isn't there?
So, so what began the doubts? Like when did you start to question some of these fundamental? Because right now it sounds like you were like the strongest Christian.
I know.
Yeah. That's part of the great part of this. I love doing this because people up to this point, if you hadn't said you were an atheist and we just ended the interview, I mean, people would be like, oh, this guy's like a super Christian. He loves God. And yeah, but that's what I like about this, because it just shows how real it was for us, for people who were Christians. It was like everything,
Everybody, I mean, I do not believe every Christian has doubts. And I cannot believe that. That's the truth. Every Christian must have doubt at some level of question of what's going on here. And I was able to embrace that and understand that. I saw that's part of your faith. That's part of being a Christian, was accepting you have doubts, but in spite of that, still believing in this person, Jesus. There's a singer, a Christian. I don't think he calls himself a Christian singer anymore, though he's still very much a man of faith. A guy called Martin Joseph, and I can remember reading an interview with him years ago. This was at a Christian music festival, and he said, "I doubt more than I've ever doubted, but I believe more than I've ever believed." And I thought, yeah, that actually sums up where I'm at. Yeah, I've got all kinds of doubts now that I would not have had years ago when my faith was so simple. But at the same time, my fundamental faith, believe in a God who loves me and this person, Jesus Christ, is probably strong as ever. So that saw me through a lot of questioning and difficulties. But over a period of time, the difficulties, the questionings got more and more. So one of the particular challenges was in terms of the difficulties within the church, and the difficulties within the church were perhaps started when there was a particular group within the church who were very much into and by this time, we're talking about the whole, Darwin delusion. I was very much into that, but actually that was challenged very quickly, and it was challenged by a guy within the church who was the associate pastor. So this came within the church, and this guy called Richard, who's still very much a friend. Richard is a super intelligent guy. He went to Cambridge. He has a first in physics from Cambridge, so he is a bright guy. And as soon as he got wind that a number of us were passing this book around about the Darwin delusion, he very quickly wanted to sort of challenge that for what it was. And I'm really glad that he did, because actually the thinking behind this book is just nonsense from a scientific level. And I'm ashamed now when I look back at that I was willing to buy into it so easily, when clearly there were questions there. And I can remember Richard putting on a couple of evening meetings to sort of talk through his concept of God and science, and how those two fit together. And he would talk about the Big Bang and the universe being billions of years old, but was able to reconcile that with his faith, no problem at all. And I'm thankful to Richard for doing that. That just shows you, doesn't it, just an aside, this is a sidebar, that faith and intelligence are two. There are people far more intelligent than me, and I dare say you, who are full on born again, Bible believers.
Yeah.
No question at all. Far more so. Intelligence and faith is an interesting one now, though. Bigger studies may show a certain correlation that those who have been to university or whatever tend to have less faith. That's a massive spectrum, and there are people far brighter than me. Intelligence and atheism are not necessarily, totally correlated.
Yeah, that's true.
And Richard, who, he's still very much a pastor of a church over in Hull, still very much a man of faith. And, I have a lot of time for Richard. He's a top guy. But so my sort of fundamentalist leanings were being, thankfully being challenged in that way. But unfortunately, within the church, there were a number of leaders, or two leaders in particular, who were very much into the young earth creationist thing. Okay, Answers in Genesis, who I think very much a US based. They do have a few sort of people over here in the UK. I don't know whether they still do, and they were absolutely determined that they used to have the Answers in Genesis magazine out in the church at the back, and on a side table for people who wanted to read it. I never did, I have to say, but they were very keen to have this presentation. This guy come over and speak for a day on young earth creationism and the scientific basis for young earth creationism. And I just thought, this is a bad idea. Their thinking was they wanted to equip the young people. I guess I was involved in young youth work very much, and their thinking was they wanted to equip the young people to be able to resist this teaching, to resist the scientific teaching that God doesn't exist before they went away to university, to give the as they saw it, the facts. So they were strengthened before they went away to university. Yeah. Whereas my position, this will have precisely the opposite effect, because if you try and get these people to believe this nonsense, as soon as it's challenged, as it will be when they go away from home, that'll just be a house of cards, and the whole thing will come falling down. What they need is a talk from this guy Richard, who since left the church to go and set up the church in Hull. They don't need to hear this young earth creationist nonsense. This is just an awful idea, and I felt very strongly about this. And but this became a big thing within the church, and the leadership decided, no, this needs to happen. And off the back of that, just knowing this was a terrible idea, I resigned as a member of the church. So we still attend. My wife didn't, but I just felt as a matter of principle, I just thought, I just can't be part of this. It's just this craziness. And sure enough, it was I met it going along and hear the guy speak for the morning, and it was just full of such nonsense. So I thought, no.
So he was with the Answers in Genesis group.
The guy who came along was a speaker for the Answers in Genesis, and he presented all the stuff that I have to say, I became obsessed with this. I was on the Answers in Genesis site most evenings researching what they were saying. So I was, I was very familiar with all the arguments they would come up with, and what a nonsense it was.
So your faith, like from what my observation when you're talking, is that it went, it very quickly kind of took, I wouldn't say like took a significant turn, but it seems like, you're caught up in this emotional charismatic stuff, and then it gets sort of intellectual, where like Richard you know what I mean? Like it takes this turn toward that a little bit.
A turn, yes, I think so. I think I would, at the time I would describe it was maturing in faith.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. There's no doubt. So that certainly, led to a great deal of disillusionment with the church, or the church leadership. So I resigned from the church, which was a shame, because they're on a personal level, one or two though, I were very much friends. Walked away from that, and from being a church member, but still attending church. It meant that we were no longer involved in the youth ministry, as I recall. I think that had happened around about the same time. But we're still active members. So you go into a youth fellowship, to a house fellowship, and all the rest of it, and attending church, services and all of that. But there's no doubt in my the voices in my head were beginning to go a bit louder, where I was beginning to ask the questions, and there were things I was observing and thinking, I'm not sure how we hold this together here, really.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, check out our newsletter at vodpodcast.com.